Hello, my name is Charlene Quint. I'm a family law attorney in the Chicago area. I represent women getting out of domestic abuse. I also founded abusecare.org as an online resource for women to help them heal and recover after domestic abuse. I'm the author of the book called Overcoming the Narcissist, Sociopath, Psychopath, and Other Domestic Abusers, the Comprehensive Handbook to recognize, remove, and recover from abuse. What we're starting today is an online series of videos to help women recognize abuse and recover and move on with their lives. So today's topic is entitled The Myths and Realities of Domestic Abuse. And we're going to cover that as the first part of the series and move on to how to recognize abuse, how to get out safely, and how to heal and move on and lead a thriving life. So let's talk today about the myths and realities of abuse. The myth is that domestic abuse rarely happens, but the reality is that it is the most silenced and misunderstood epidemic of our time. Astoundingly, the Center for Disease Control has a recent survey that states that 35% of women will experience rape, severe physical violence, and/or stalking by an intimate partner in her lifetime. 35% of women. To put it in context, that is approximately the same percentage of all people who are going to contract cancer at some time in their life. Other studies, in addition to the physical violence, rape, and stalking, show that up to 48% of women experience coercive control and emotional and verbal and psychological abuse in their intimate partner relationships at some point in her life. These are astounding figures, and they are an epidemic in our society. The myth is that abuse just doesn't happen in Christian and Jewish communities, but the reality is that it happens just as often in Jewish and Christian communities. It occurs in nearly every congregation. The myth is that if you're a Christian man, you're not an abusive man. But the reality is that the most abusive men are those deemed nominal Christians, those who claim to be Christian, but who rarely or sporadically ever attend church. The myth is that Christian women identify abuse and then get out of it before they ever get married. But the reality is that Christian women actually stay in abusive situations and abusive marriages significantly longer than women of no faith. In fact, Christian women often don't even recognize their partner's abusive behaviors as abuse. The myth is that men and women abuse each other equally, but the reality is that over 90% of abusers who perpetrate abuse are males, and they want to maintain power and control over another person. 85% of the victims are women. The myth is abuse doesn't happen in nice communities, not to people like us, not to educated, not to people that have wealth, not to people that live in nice houses. But the reality is domestic abuse is prevalent in affluent communities where power and money lead people to believe that rules don't apply to them. In fact, some of the professions with the highest number of sociopaths, psychopaths, and narcissists are those of the high-paying professions: lawyers and doctors and business leaders, and believe it or not, clergy and policemen as well. Domestic abuse is also prevalent in lower income communities. However, it's most likely to be kept silent in the higher income communities. It permeates all races, all ethnicities, all religious, and all economic groups. The myth is that you can go to your clergy and he's going to know what to say if there's domestic abuse in your relationship. But the reality is that the majority of clergy and congregational leaders, and sometimes even counselors, have not received adequate training in domestic abuse and how to properly support the victim and how to properly hold the abuser accountable. The myth is that pastors know about this and they talk about it, but the reality is that of Protestant pastors, 42% rarely or even never address domestic abuse from the pulpit. And only 22% say that they speak about it, but that's only once a year. Sadly, 75% of pastors say they know a friend, or family member, or church member who's experienced domestic violence. And about 75% say it's a problem in their community, but also 75% don't think it's a problem in their own church. The myth is very few people are affected by domestic abuse, and it's lying below the surface. But the reality is that each year, just in the United States, domestic abuse is responsible for over 2 million injuries and 1,300 deaths, and over 5 million female intimate partner victims. The myth is it doesn't cost anybody anything. But the reality is for businesses and for our society, domestic abuse costs a lot. Victims of domestic abuse lose 8 million days of paid work per year. Domestic violence costs the U.S. economy over $8.3 billion. 5.8 of that billion is for medical and mental health services, and $2.5 billion is in lower productivity at work. Abused women trying to go to work and then going to abuse at home and raising children all at the same time have severe mental health issues and physical health issues. They have a higher risk of serious health concerns, including heart disease, stroke, asthma, depression, suicide, gastrointestinal problems, neurological disorders, chronic pain, disability, anxiety, unintended pregnancy, miscarriage, stillbirth, HIV, STDs, and almost all women of domestic abuse experience post-traumatic stress due to the prolonged exposure to stress and to forced sex. The myth is there's nothing that domestic abuse does that affects the workplace. The reality is that 50% of victims are harassed in their workplace. 64% of victims of domestic violence have diminished ability to work due to being distracted, due to their fear of discovery, due to harassment by their partner at their workplace, fear of their intimate partner's unexpected visits at the workplace, inability to complete assignments on time because she is so distracted and her mind is so overwhelmed with dealing with the abuse. And of course, many of them lose their jobs due to domestic abuse. The myth is we don't have a domestic abuse problem. The reality is we do. The number one correlation between mass shootings is domestic abuse. Almost everyone who has participated in the mass shooting has had domestic abuse against women in their history. We have a problem. Let's find a solution, let's support our victims, and let's end domestic violence. No woman left behind is my motto. And until next time, be safe.